One thing I find interesting about living in a Christian culture is that the History Channel actually shows Jesus Christ, historical type shows about his life and uses the Bible as reference material for what kind of life he led, and various biblical scholars talking about it and so forth. And I've never seen anything on the History Channel, not that I've seen everything on the History Channel, but I've never seen anything that questions whether or not he actually did exist. And that's kind of strange to me, because after seeing the documentary The God Who Wasn't There, there's very good historical evidence that he did not exist, that he was a fictional character in a story. There was no mention of him until 60 AD, which was 27 years after his death. And so it's kind of odd that the History Channel treats his life without question as though it existed in these documentaries. A lot of times they'll show them on Christmas or Easter. And I think this needs to be questioned as to whether or not this is legitimate history, because people don't, like their faith challenged, obviously. But if we start looking at what is, we don't have to reject all of spirituality, but we can see that what has happened through the history of religions is various modifications of different principles that at their core are well-intentioned and have positive values and so forth. But when we cling to things that are ancient and don't question whether or not they're actually true, I think it keeps us kind of stuck in our evolution. And it's best to move forward and to question these things and to see what works and what doesn't, but to not cling to old ideas. I think metaphorically, there's a similarity in clinging to the stories of the Bible as kind of like people that follow their family traditions and don't challenge the family traditions and kind of enable dysfunction and just carry on things that don't really work because they're not standing up for what is really going on, that kind of thing. And I think that Christianity and the whole concept of Jesus Christ having been like a real person that was here, there's no evidence of that. I mean, in this documentary, which I'd recommend, called The God Who Wasn't There, there's no written record of such a person until 60 AD, when they started writing about his life. And it seems to be that he is a collection of various other heroes, throughout the history of the heroic myth. And teachings are very similar to those teachings of the other myths that came before him. So obviously, if somebody like Jesus Christ existed, somebody would have written about it and recorded their various impressive meetings and witnessings of such a person. But it wasn't written about till later on, because you can write whatever you want about somebody that's supposedly already dead, and nobody's going to question it and so forth. So it appears that's what actually happened. Now, spirituality is the core of my life, and I don't think that you have to question whether or not God exists or whether or not we are spirit in nature if you don't believe in Jesus. But unfortunately, there's a lot of times a false dichotomy in which you are a Christian or you're an atheist in this culture, and that's it. Or another dichotomy is you're into religion or you are an atheist or agnostic, whatever. And I, like many more people are becoming, or I consider myself to be spiritual but not religious, and I believe that our essence is spirit, and that we can witness and examine the way spiritual occurrences unfold in our lives, such as synchronicity, things that are related to guidance, and feeling that we're guided from both external signs and our own inner guidance, our inner wisdom, and feeling a kind of intervention, a divine intervention in our lives, and opening ourselves up to these concepts. Because if we're not open to them, we're not going to believe in them, which is why atheism is easy to believe in. I was an atheist for the first 29 or so years of my life, I suppose. And then I started to open up and experience synchronicity and realize that traditional science couldn't explain everything. And I was resistant to watching the documentary The God Who Wasn't There because I wanted to believe that Jesus was a real person, and I had been inspired by various spiritual texts that were supposedly channeled from him, which of course, if you are a channeler and you believe in Jesus and you feel something really powerful coming through you, it's understandable that you want that to come from Jesus, the physical manifestation of God and whatever, depending on the story. So it's understandable that there's a cultural influence when you're channeling material and things are coming through you. And it doesn't mean the material is any less useful, but we all have to discern for ourselves what feels real and what feels phony. And unfortunately, in the media, there's this dichotomy where you have the History Channel not challenging Jesus's existence, but looking at it more in terms of, various biblical scholars, talk about this is what happened during his childhood, and they theorize this. And that's just, silly. It's just using the Bible. It's self-referential, basically. And then you have Bill Maher challenging various religions on Real Time with Bill Maher and other, his film, Religulous. But he's an atheist, and he doesn't see where there is room for spirituality without the existence of religion. And I really do believe in my heart that this is the big challenge that we have right now as a species, is to drop the myths, drop the dogma, and also open ourselves up to the fact that we could have a spirit, that there could be a deeper spiritual meaning, and that there is purpose. And the videos that I've done on this channel, a lot of them are about trying to get at what is our essence, what is our purpose, how can we make life work, and embrace that. But these extreme sides, a lot of them are fueled by anger and clinging to ideology that's rather rigid, both on the atheistic and religious side. But I think it's good to step back and to try to examine realistically what's going on and have an open mind and utilize history. Ask yourself, why wasn't there any written documentation of Jesus during his life? People could write, they could record things, and it all came later on. We don't like to see, as a Christian culture, we don't like to see Jesus go the way of Zeus and, Hermes and other ancient gods and so forth, other revered religious icons of the past. But I think that to move forward and be realistic, that's something that we need to accept, is that it does not look like Jesus was a real person. So take what is good from the teachings, but let's face it, there's a lot of judgment and just weird non-spiritual perspectives in the Bible as far as I'm concerned. So take the stuff about forgiveness, but recognize that if Jesus preached non-judgment, then why is there so much judgment in the Bible? It's because ego was behind the writings, and judging this and judging that, and perpetuating this fear-based notion of hell, scaring people into submission and getting them to believe a certain perspective for fear that they won't go to heaven. I don't believe that there is this heaven. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't, that which we perceive as positive in the world and good is because of dichotomy, and this thought of a place that you go to if you behave correctly doesn't really resonate for me in the same way that reincarnation resonates. Being in spirit form, yes. It does resonate. I do think there is something to that. I think that we're here in this form to experience dichotomies and expand upon our awareness of who we truly are at our core nature, which is spirit, which is love and interconnectedness, but defining ourselves through dealing with the dichotomies of life and trying to move in an evolved state. Thanks for listening.